By the time I turned 24, I owned $1 million empire and a penthouse in the heart of the city. I had everything I ever dreamed of. But the moment I stepped into that penthouse for the first time, I realized something I couldn't ignore. My parents had been right all along. Not about the way I lived, or the way I spoke, or the way I dressed. They were right about one thing: I would never be able to build anything without them. They were wrong. And I was going to prove it to them in the most humiliating way possible. I'm not going to pretend this story is pretty. It isn't. It's messy, it's painful. It's the kind of story you tell when you're trying to convince yourself that you're not broken anymore. But it started with a lie. My parents were never poor. They just wanted everyone to believe they were. When I was a kid, my dad used to say, "We don't have money. We have dignity." My mom would smile. And the way she smiled always made me feel like dignity was a punishment. We lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood where people knew your name and your business. My parents never let me have friends over. They said it was unsafe. But it was never unsafe, it was controlled. I remember once I asked my mom for a birthday cake. Not a big one. Just a simple cake with candles. She looked at me like I was asking for a diamond. "We don't do that," she said. I didn't understand then. I thought we were just poor. I thought maybe I'd grow up and earn money and make things right. But as I got older, the truth became impossible to ignore. My parents weren't struggling, they were pretending. They had a second apartment they never used. They had a car they never drove. They bought expensive clothes. But only for themselves. They spent money on luxury things and then told me we were broke. And the worst part: they made me feel like it was my fault. Like I was ungrateful. Like I was selfish. They made me believe that I owed them my life because they sacrificed. For me, I didn't know what sacrifice was until I was 21. That's when I started working. Not just working, hustling, grinding, fighting. I was the kind of person who never asked for help. I didn't know how. I didn't trust anyone. I had seen what people did when you trusted them. They used you. They crushed you. They made you feel like you were nothing. So I decided I would be something. I started with a small online business selling custom phone cases. It sounds silly, but it was my first real taste of freedom. I would wake up at 4 a.m. and work until midnight. I would go to college during the day and run my business at night. I did everything alone. I learned marketing. I learned design. I learned how to talk to customers. I learned how to survive. Within a year, my little business turned into a small company. Within 2 years, it turned into a brand. And by the time I was 24, I had $1 million empire that people recognized. I was proud. I was confident. I was finally in control. But I still had one problem: my parents. They didn't know I had built this. They thought I was still struggling. They thought I was still begging them for money. They were wrong. And I knew the moment I walked into their apartment and saw their faces. It was a Sunday morning. I remember the day because it was the first time I drove my car to their place without calling them. I stood outside their door, holding a bag of groceries. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I knocked. My mom opened the door and looked at me like I was an intruder. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I smiled. "I brought groceries," I said. She laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel like you're a joke. "We don't need groceries," she said. I stepped inside. Their apartment smelled the same. Old furniture. Dust. The faint scent of perfume that never left my mother's skin. My dad was sitting in the living room, watching the news. He didn't even look at me. "Is this what you do now?" he asked. "What?" I said. "This. Showing up like you own the place," he said. "Like you're better than us." I felt something inside me break. I wasn't better than them. I was just free. But I couldn't let him see that. I walked into the kitchen and put the groceries down. I started unpacking them, trying to act like this was normal. My mom watched me with a look of disgust. "You don't have a job," she said. "You don't have money." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She continued. "You're always dreaming. You think you're special. But you're not." I looked at her. I looked at my father. I looked at the life they had built. And I realized something. They weren't angry at me because I was failing. They were angry because I was succeeding. They were angry because I didn't need them. That night, I went back to my penthouse and sat on my couch, staring at the city lights. I felt a rage inside me that I had never felt before. Not the kind of rage that makes you shout. The kind of rage that makes you quiet. The kind of rage that makes you plan. Because I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just show them what I had become. That would be too easy. I needed them to feel what they had done to me. I needed them to understand the humiliation they had put me through. So I made a decision. I would let them continue to believe I was poor. I would let them continue to look down on me. And then I would take everything from them. Not by force. By intelligence. By strategy. By letting karma do what it does best. For the next few months, I lived a double life. I kept my business running. I kept growing. I kept building. But I also kept visiting my parents. I played the role of the obedient child. The one who needed them. The one who was always struggling. I asked for money. I asked for food. I asked for advice. And they gave it. They gave me their time. They gave me their attention. They gave me their confidence. They gave me their control. They thought they had me. They thought they were still the ones who mattered. But while they were feeding my ego, I was building my plan. You see, my parents weren't just controlling. They were proud. They were proud of the image they had built. They had spent years pretending they were poor. But they weren't poor. They were wealthy. They had money hidden away. They had investments. They had property. They just didn't want anyone to know. They didn't want anyone to see them as successful. Because success to them was something you used to control others. And they had always controlled me. So I started digging. I started asking questions. I started listening. I started noticing things. Like the way my father would talk about the other apartment, like it was a secret. Like the way my mother would mention a friend who could help, when she was actually talking about a lawyer. Like the way they would always say, "We don't have money," but then go out for dinner in expensive restaurants. I followed them. Not physically, but financially. I started tracking their spending. I started looking at patterns. I started connecting the dots. And then I found it. A small investment account. Not a lot. But enough. And it was under my father's name. It was the first real proof that they had been lying to me my whole life. I felt sick. But I didn't react. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I did something else. I started building a case. I started building a future. I started preparing to take everything. And then, one day, my mother did something that changed everything. She called me. It was late at night. I was in my office, working on a new project. I was tired. I was stressed. I was finally starting to feel the weight of everything I had done. My phone rang. It was her. "Can you come over?" she asked. "Why?" I asked. "Your father, he's not well," she said. I didn't believe her. But I went anyway. When I got there, my father was sitting on the couch. He looked pale. He looked weak. He looked like someone who had been beaten by life. My mother was crying. "Your father had a heart attack," she said. I sat down. I didn't know what to say. I looked at my father and I saw him in a way I had never seen him before. Not as a villain, not as a tyrant. As a man. A broken man. My heart softened. For a moment, I forgot everything. I forgot the years of humiliation. I forgot the lies. I forgot the control. I just saw a father who was dying. My mother looked at me. "I don't know what to do," she said. "We need money, we need help." I felt my anger return. Not because my father was sick, but because my mother was using it. Because she was trying to manipulate me. Because she was trying to make me feel guilty. I stood up. "I'll help," I said. My mother's face changed. She looked relieved. She looked grateful. She looked satisfied. That's when I realized something. They didn't want my help. They wanted my obedience. They wanted my dependency. They wanted to keep me under their control. And I wasn't going to let them. I decided then that I would help them. But I would do it my way. I would do it on my terms. And I would make sure they never had power over me again. I started by paying for my father's medical bills. I paid for his treatment. I paid for his medications. I paid for everything. I didn't tell them I was doing it. I didn't want them to know. Because I wanted them to feel like they were still in control. But I also wanted to make sure they understood something. I was not their child. I was not their responsibility. I was my own person. I was my own success. And I would not let them use me anymore. After my father recovered, I started taking more control. I started managing their finances. I started paying their bills. I started making decisions. My mother didn't like it. She tried to fight me. She tried to take control back. She tried to tell me I was doing it wrong. She tried to make me feel like I was failing. But I stayed calm. I stayed patient. I stayed silent. Because I knew what I was doing. I was building a trap. And I was waiting for them to fall into it. One day, my mother called me. "Your father and I want to talk to you," she said. I agreed. I went to their apartment. They sat me down. My father looked at me with a strange expression. It was almost proud. My mother looked at me with a smile. "Your father and I have decided to give you your share," she said. I froze. "What share?" I asked. They both smiled. "Me have some property," my father said. "We want to give you your share. We want to be fair." I looked at them. I felt a rush of emotions. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I stayed calm. I smiled. "Thank you," I said. My mother looked relieved. My father looked satisfied. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought they had finally made me dependent. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that the property they were giving me was worthless. They didn't know that it was a trap. They didn't know that I had already taken control of their assets. You see, while they were busy pretending they were poor, I had been quietly building my empire. I had been quietly investing. I had been quietly buying. I had been quietly securing my future. And I had done it all without them. I had done it all on my own. I had done it all while they were busy pretending they were the ones who mattered. When they handed me the papers, I signed them. I thanked them. I left. And that night, I did something that changed everything. I went to my lawyer. I gave him the documents. I told him to prepare the transfer. I told him to take control of their assets. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted them to understand what they had done. I wanted them to feel the humiliation they had put me through. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness they had made me feel. The next morning, my mother called me. She was screaming. She was crying. She was begging. "Please," she said. "Please, we need the money. We need the property. You can't do this." I stayed silent. I didn't say anything. Because I knew she didn't deserve my words. She deserved the truth. But she couldn't handle the truth. So I let her scream. I let her beg. I let her fall apart. And then I did something that made her stop. I said one sentence. "I'm not your child anymore," I said. "I'm your punishment." She went quiet. For the first time, she heard me. She understood. She realized that I wasn't just a child who needed them. I was a person. A person who had been broken. A person who had been humiliated. A person who had been controlled. And now, I was free. The next few weeks were the most intense of my life. My parents tried everything. They tried to get the property back. They tried to sue me. They tried to threaten me. They tried to blackmail me. They even tried to tell people I was mentally unstable. But I was prepared. I had everything documented. I had everything recorded. I had everything planned. And the best part. They had no proof. They had no leverage. They had nothing. Because I had been careful. I had been strategic. I had been patient. And now I was winning. The final moment came on a day I will never forget. It was a sunny afternoon. I was in my penthouse, looking out at the city. My phone rang. It was my mother. She sounded calm. She sounded composed. She sounded defeated. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, but I agreed. We met at a cafe. My mother sat down. She looked older. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had finally realized the cost of their lies. She looked like someone who had lost everything. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." I felt a wave of emotion. But I didn't let it show. "Why?" I asked. "Because we used you," she said. "Because we made you feel like you were nothing. Because we made you believe we were poor. Because we controlled you." I didn't say anything. I just listened. She continued. "We thought we were protecting you," she said. "We thought we were teaching you humility. We thought we were making you strong." I looked at her. I saw the pain in her eyes. But I also saw something else, pride. The same pride that had controlled me my whole life. I realized then that she wasn't sorry because she understood. She was sorry because she lost. She was sorry because she was no longer in control. And that's when I finally understood the truth. My parents weren't evil. They were just broken. They were broken in a way that made them believe control was love. They were broken in a way that made them believe humiliation was discipline. They were broken in a way that made them believe lies were protection. I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because I forgave them, but because I finally understood. And understanding is powerful. I looked at my mother and said, "You don't get to apologize and fix this. You don't get to erase the years." She nodded. "I know," she said. I stood up. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said. "I'm here to tell you that I'm done." I walked away. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. I went back to my penthouse. I sat on my couch. I looked at my empire. I looked at my life. And I realized something. I didn't build this empire to prove anything to my parents. I built it to prove something to myself. I built it because I refused to be a victim. I built it because I refused to be controlled. I built it because I refused to be humiliated. And now, I was standing at the top of the world. Not because they helped me, but because I survived them. And the most satisfying part, they had no idea. They still thought they had power over me. They still thought they could control me. They still thought they were the reason I existed. But I knew the truth. I knew that by the time I was 24, I owned $1 million empire and a penthouse without my parents' help. And they would never be able to take that away from me. Because I had already taken everything from them. Not their money, not their property, but their control, their lies, their power. And that was the most powerful revenge of all. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's it. That's the ending. But the truth is, the story didn't end there. The revenge wasn't just about taking control of their assets. It was about making them feel the same helplessness they had forced on me for years. And that part came later. A few months after I cut them off, I got a call from my father. It was late. It was the kind of call that makes you feel like you're about to be dragged back into a storm. "Your mother is sick," he said. My heart dropped. Not because I cared about his lies, but because I cared about the person who had been trapped in those lies. My mother. She wasn't the villain I had built her up to be. She was a victim too. She was a victim of her own pride. She was a victim of her own fear. She was a victim of her own need to control. But that didn't mean I was going to go back. I had learned my lesson. I had learned that love doesn't come with conditions. And my parents had conditioned me my whole life. I asked him, "What happened?" "She collapsed," he said. "The doctors say it's serious. She needs help." I didn't respond. Because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if this was real. I didn't know if this was another manipulation. But something inside me told me this was different. I asked him, "Where is she?" "At home," he said. "In the apartment." I paused. I could feel the anger rising again. Not because she was sick. Because she had made me suffer for years. Because she had taken my childhood and turned it into a prison. Because she had tried to keep me small. But then I remembered something. I remembered how I felt when I saw my father on that couch. I remembered the moment I realized he was just a man. I remembered how I had felt that strange relief. I realized then that I didn't want revenge anymore. Not the kind that destroys. I wanted something else. I wanted closure. I wanted peace. I wanted to end the story in a way that didn't make me feel like a monster. So I did something that surprised even me. I went to see my mother. I didn't tell her I was coming. I didn't call. I just went. When I walked into their apartment, my mother was lying on the couch. She looked weak. She looked small. She looked like someone who had finally run out of energy. My father was sitting beside her, holding her hand. When they saw me, they both froze. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked like he wanted to apologize. But he didn't know how. I walked over and sat beside her. I didn't say anything. I just held her hand. It felt strange. It felt like I was touching a stranger. But it also felt like I was touching the woman who had given me life. I stayed there for hours. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I didn't demand. I just sat. And in that silence, something happened. My mother started to cry. She cried like someone who had been holding everything inside for years. She cried like someone who had finally realized the cost of their pride. She cried like someone who had finally understood that her control had destroyed her family. When she calmed down, she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. But I did something else. I told her the truth. "I didn't come here to forgive you," I said. "I came here to tell you that you lost. You lost the only thing that mattered." My mother's face changed. "What do you mean?" she asked. I looked at her. I looked at my father. And I said, "You lost me?" That was the moment I realized the true power of my revenge. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the empire. It wasn't the penthouse. It was the fact that I had taken my life back. I had taken my freedom back. I had taken my dignity back. And they couldn't take it away from me. But my revenge wasn't over. Because the final part of the story wasn't about them. It was about me. You see, when you grow up in a house where love is conditional, you carry that damage with you. You carry it into your relationships. You carry it into your work. You carry it into your mind. You carry it into your heart. And even when you succeed, you still feel like you're not enough. I thought I had won. But I realized something else. I had been running. Running from the pain. Running from the humiliation. Running from the truth. And now I was finally ready to face it. I started going to therapy. I started talking about my childhood. I started confronting the way my parents had shaped me. And the more I talked, the more I realized something. My parents weren't the only ones who hurt me. I had hurt myself too. I had spent years believing I was worthless. I had spent years thinking I needed their approval. I had spent years trying to prove myself to people who didn't deserve it. And now, I was finally free. I was finally strong. I was finally whole. The last time I saw my parents was a year later. My mother had recovered. My father was healthier. They were still the same people. But they were different too. They looked at me with a kind of respect. Not the fake respect they had always given me. Real respect. My mother approached me. She looked at me and said, "You did it." I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I did." And then she said something that shocked me. "You didn't need us," she said. "You never did." I looked at her. And I realized something. They had finally admitted the truth. Not because they were humble. But because they were broken. Because they were tired. Because they had finally understood that their control had destroyed everything. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of forgiveness. But the peace of closure. The peace of knowing that I had won. The peace of knowing that I had survived. The peace of knowing that I was finally free. And as I walked away from them that day, I looked up at the sky and whispered to myself, "I'm not your child anymore. I'm my own person. I'm my own empire." And for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged to myself. The revenge was complete. Not because I destroyed them. But because I destroyed the part of me that needed them. And that, more than anything else, was the true victory. I know you're still wondering. If I walked away, if I had my empire, if I finally proved them wrong, why did I still feel that heavy emptiness? That's the part nobody tells you. You can build $1 million empire. You can buy a penthouse. You can even make your parents feel small. But if you don't heal, you still carry the scars. So I did something I never thought I would do. I went back. Not to them. To the person I had been. To the girl who used to stand in the kitchen, watching her mother cook, pretending she didn't want more. To the girl who used to sit in her room, listening to her parents argue, telling herself it wasn't her fault. To the girl who used to cry herself to sleep, thinking the world was cruel because she was worthless. I went back to her. I started writing. I started journaling. I started telling my story, not for fame, not for money, for release. And the more I wrote, the more I realized something. My story wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. It was about a person who was told she couldn't be anything, and then became everything. And that's when the real change happened. I started using my empire for something bigger. I started helping people who were trapped in the same cycle. People who were controlled by parents, partners, or society. People who were told they were nothing. People who were told they were lucky to be given scraps. I started giving them a way out. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs. I started funding small businesses. I started giving opportunities to people who had been told they didn't deserve them. And when I saw the impact, something inside me shifted. The revenge that once burned like fire inside me turned into something else. A quiet power. A peaceful strength. I realized that my parents' control had given me something they never intended. It had given me a hunger to be more. A hunger to be free. And now, I was using that hunger to build a life that mattered. But the story isn't over yet. Because the most unexpected part of my revenge happened when I least expected it. One day, a young woman reached out to me. She sent me a message that said, "Your story saved me." I read it over and over. I couldn't believe it. She told me she was in a situation similar to mine. She was trapped. She was controlled. She was humiliated. She was told she would never be anything. She said she had been living in her parents' house, feeling like a prisoner, and then she watched my video. She said she felt something inside her change. She said she realized she wasn't alone. She said she realized she could be free. And then she said something that made me cry. She said, "Thank you for giving me hope." I didn't know what to say. Because for years, I thought my story was only about me. I thought my story was only about my revenge. But I realized then that my story was bigger than that. My story was about every person who had ever been told they were nothing. My story was about every person who had ever been controlled. My story was about every person who had ever been humiliated. My story was about the power of survival, the power of patience, the power of strategy, the power of silence, the power of winning, and the best part, my parents had no idea. They had no idea their lies had created something that could change lives. They had no idea their control had created a force they couldn't stop. They had no idea their cruelty had created a woman who could inspire others. And that, more than anything else, was the true revenge. Not the money. Not the empire. Not the penthouse. But the fact that I turned my pain into power. I turned my humiliation into strength. I turned my anger into purpose. And I became someone they could never understand. Someone they could never control. Someone they could never break. The last time I spoke to my father, he said something that still haunts me. He said, "You don't need us." I looked at him and replied, "I never did." And then I walked away. Not with hatred, not with anger. With peace. Because I had finally won. Not by taking everything from them. But by taking everything back for myself. And now, when I look at my life, when I look at my empire, when I look at my penthouse, I don't feel the emptiness anymore. I feel the power. I feel the freedom. I feel the victory. And I know, without a doubt, that by the time I was 24, I didn't just own $1 million empire. I owned my life. And no one can ever take that away from me. I know you're still thinking there has to be more. Because stories like this don't end neatly. They don't end like a movie where the credits roll and you feel satisfied. They end with a life that keeps going. A life that keeps fighting. A life that keeps healing. And for me, the next chapter was the one that truly changed everything. A few months after my mother's illness, I started receiving messages, not just from fans. From people who wanted help. From people who were stuck. From people who were scared. From people who were begging for a way out. I didn't expect it. I thought my story would be a one-time thing. A lesson. A warning. A cautionary tale. But it wasn't. It was a door. And people were walking through it. I began receiving messages from girls and boys who were being controlled by their parents, partners, or even their employers. They were being told they weren't good enough. They were being told they were lucky to be allowed to dream. They were being told they had no future. And every message felt like a punch in the gut. Because I knew exactly how it felt. I knew what it was like to be trapped in a life you didn't choose. I knew what it was like to be told you were nothing. I knew what it was like to be humiliated. So I started a foundation. I didn't call it a foundation at first. I called it a safe place. I called it a helpline. I called it anything that sounded less like a charity and more like a door. I wanted people to know that help wasn't a pity gift. Help was a right. Help was a way out. And the more I worked on it, the more I realized something. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a movement. A movement of people who refused to be controlled. A movement of people who refused to be humiliated. A movement of people who refused to accept their pain as their destiny. And the more I saw the impact, the more my story became bigger than my revenge. My empire wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were nothing. It belonged to every person who had ever been trapped in a life they didn't choose. It belonged to every person who had ever been humiliated. And then something happened that I never expected. My parents reached out. Not for money, not for control. For help. They asked me to speak at an event. They asked me to speak to a crowd of people about how to succeed. They said they wanted to be associated with me. They said they wanted to be seen as my parents. I looked at the message and I felt a strange feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was curiosity. I wondered what they were trying to do. Were they trying to repair the damage? Or were they trying to ride my success? I decided to go. Not because I wanted to forgive them, but because I wanted to see them face the truth. The day of the event, I walked onto the stage. The crowd was huge. The lights were bright. The cameras were rolling. I looked out at the sea of faces and I felt a wave of emotion. I thought about my childhood. I thought about the years of humiliation. I thought about the years of pain. And I thought about how far I had come. I started speaking. I told my story. I told it without drama. I told it without exaggeration. I told it like a confession. And when I got to the part about my parents, I saw them sitting in the front row. They looked nervous. They looked ashamed. They looked small. I continued. I spoke about how they had controlled me. How they had lied to me. How they had made me feel worthless. I spoke about how I had built my empire alone. I spoke about how I had taken back my life. I spoke about how I had turned my pain into power. And then I said something that made the whole room go silent. I said, "My parents are here." The crowd gasped. My parents looked at each other. They looked terrified. I continued. I don't hate them, I said. But I don't forgive them either. I watched my mother's face change. She looked like she was about to cry. I saw my father's jaw tighten. I felt a strange satisfaction. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted them to see the truth. Because I wanted them to understand that their control ended the day I decided it did. The event ended. The crowd applauded. My parents left quietly, and I felt something I had never felt before. Relief. Not because I had won, but because I had finally said it out loud. I had finally taken the power back. And then, something even more unexpected happened. After the event, a reporter approached me. She asked me a question that made my heart skip a beat. She asked, "Do you ever regret what you did?" I paused. I thought about the revenge. I thought about the money. I thought about the pain. I thought about the freedom. And I realized something. I didn't regret what I did. But I did regret one thing. I regretted the time I wasted. I regretted the years I spent believing I was nothing. I regretted the years I spent trying to prove myself to people who never deserved it. So I answered her honestly. I don't regret it, I said. But I wish I had done it sooner. The reporter nodded. And then she said something that made me smile. She said, "You're an inspiration." I looked at her. And I realized something. I had become the person I always wanted to be. Not because of the empire. Not because of the penthouse. Because of the strength. Because of the courage. Because of the ability to rise above. And that's when I knew the final chapter of my story wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. It was about becoming someone who could turn pain into purpose. Someone who could turn humiliation into power. Someone who could turn anger into a mission. And the most powerful part. My parents had no control over it, they never would. Because I had finally taken back my life. I had finally taken back my story. And I had finally become the person I was always meant to be. So if you're watching this, and you feel trapped. If you feel like you're being controlled. If you feel like you're being humiliated. If you feel like you'll never be enough. I want you to know something. You don't need anyone's permission to be free. You don't need anyone's approval to be successful. You don't need anyone's love to be worthy. And one day, when you finally break free, when you finally build your life, When you finally take back your power, you'll realize the most satisfying revenge isn't hurting them. It's becoming the person they never believed you could be. And that, more than anything else, is the true victory. Alright. Here's the part that most people never expect. The part that makes the story feel like it has a second ending. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always end with a victory. Sometimes it ends with a question. And I got that question when I least expected it. One night, about a year after that event, I was sitting in my penthouse. The city lights were shining. The world felt quiet. I was alone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I didn't feel the need to fight. I didn't feel the need to plan. I just felt calm. But then my phone rang. It was my mother. My heart skipped. I didn't answer at first. I stared at the screen like it was a test. I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if I was strong enough to face her again. But I answered. Hell, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then she spoke. I'm sorry, she said. I felt the anger rise. But it was different now. It wasn't the same anger I felt when I was 22. It wasn't the same anger I felt when I was 23. It wasn't the same anger I felt when I was 24. It was a different kind of anger. A calmer kind. A wiser kind. Why are you calling? I asked. My mother sighed. I don't want anything from you, she said. I want to understand. I was surprised. Understand what? I asked. She paused. I want to understand why you left, she said. Why you didn't come back. Why you didn't forgive us. Why you never spoke to us again. I stared at the phone. I didn't know what to say. Because the truth was, I didn't leave because I hated them. I left because I couldn't stay. I left because I couldn't live in a house where love was conditional. I left because I couldn't live in a world where my worth was determined by someone else. But I didn't say that. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she still had power over me. So I said something else. I left because I had to. I said. I left because I needed to survive. My mother was quiet. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. I'm proud of you, she said. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know if she was lying. I didn't know if she was trying to manipulate me. But something in her voice sounded genuine. I asked, why now? My mother hesitated. Then she said, because your father, he told me something. I felt my heart tighten. What did he tell you? I asked. My mother's voice trembled. He said he's been living with guilt, she said. He said he never realized how much he hurt you. He said he wishes he could take it back. I felt something inside me crack. Not because I believed him. But because I finally saw the truth. They were broken. They were finally facing the damage they had caused. And it wasn't because I had forgiven them. It was because they had to face the consequences of their actions. I took a deep breath. Then I asked the question that had been burning inside me for years. Do you regret it? I asked. My mother's voice broke. Yes, she said. Every day. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should feel relief. I didn't know if I should feel pain. I didn't know if I should feel anything at all. But then my mother said something that changed everything. I want to see you, she said. My heart raced. I didn't know if I should say yes. I didn't know if I should say no. Because part of me wanted to forgive her. And part of me wanted to protect myself. I thought about the girl I used to be. The girl who had been controlled. The girl who had been humiliated. The girl who had been told she was nothing. I thought about the woman I had become. The woman who had built an empire. The woman who had taken back her life. The woman who had finally found peace. I realized then that I didn't need to decide right away. I could take my time. I could choose my own pace. So I said, maybe. My mother's voice softened. Thank you, she said. And then she said something that made me stop. I'm sorry for everything, she said. But I also want to thank you. I was confused. For what? I asked. For making me realize how much I failed, she said. For making me realize that love isn't control. For making me realize that I raised a strong woman. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I should feel proud. I didn't know if I should feel hurt. I didn't know if I should feel anything at all. But I realized something. Even after all the pain, even after all the revenge, even after all the success, My parents still had the power to affect me. Not because they controlled me, but because they were my parents. And that's the part that makes the story complicated. The part that makes it real. Because real life doesn't end with a clean victory. Real life ends with questions. Real life ends with unfinished emotions. Real life ends with the understanding that some wounds never fully heal. But you can still move forward. You can still build a life. You can still be free. You can still be happy. So I hung up the phone. I looked at the city lights. I felt a strange sense of calm. And I realized something. The revenge was never about destroying them. It was about freeing myself. It was about taking back my life. It was about becoming someone they could never control. And now, years later, I can say with certainty, I did. I became that person. I became the woman they never believed I could be. And the best part, I did it without them. I did it without their help. I did it without their approval. And I did it with the one thing they could never take away from me. My own power. So if you're watching this and you're still trapped, if you're still being controlled, if you're still being humiliated, I want you to know one thing. You don't have to stay. You don't have to be small. You don't have to accept their version of your life. You can build your own. You can rise above. You can become the person they never imagined. And one day, you'll look back at them. And you'll realize the most powerful revenge isn't hurting them. It's becoming your own victory.